our guest, Patrick Martin, a licensed clinical social worker. Welcome to the show.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anita. It's great to be on your show. I love this world of podcasting because we get to meet new people who are aligned with our values and the passion that we have. And it's always a special treat when I get to connect with another therapist in the podcast space. It's definitely something I don't take for granted. And it always makes me happy when I see other therapists using a platform like this to really share the wealth of their experience to the masses, which
I
I think is
agree.
oftentimes something that's missed because of the access to care and all those barriers. And I think platforms like this really help, whether it's other clinicians or consumers of mental
Yeah.
health or would-be consumers, to really grab a hold of some of this knowledge, this
Yeah.
wisdom about how we can live our best lives.
I wanted to tell the audience here that you specialize in CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. Can you please just let them know a little bit of what that is?
Sure, my pleasure. I could talk for days about CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy has become a lot better known in recent years. The father of CBT is Aaron Beck of the Beck
Mm,
Institute. He was one of the first guys to really coin CBT and the whole process. We'll get more into that. But CBT is basically thinking about our thinking,
yeah.
right? Which is not something we're really conditioned to do, right? In society, our thoughts are automatic, or what we will refer to as automatic thoughts. Now, doesn't mean they're bad. There are negative thoughts, but
Yeah.
our thoughts are pretty much on autopilot for the most part. And it's not a new concept, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy has been around for eons. We just didn't call
Yeah.
it cognitive behavioral therapy. It's been practiced, the methods around the world. Sometimes we just repackage things in
Yeah.
a different kind of framework. But cognitive behavioral therapy is the practice of learning to think about our thinking
Hmm.
and learn to direct our thoughts to more constructive frameworks,
Yeah.
themes, and to not take every thought as valid, right? And to
Okay.
learn to catch our thoughts and then contemplate whether that's a helpful thought or unhelpful thought. And usually this takes a long time, a lot of practice. This is oftentimes why people have a really hard time meditating
Oh,
when they
yeah.
first start practicing meditation, is because the ability to be still, especially in today's world where everything is vying for our attention in a time of age where we have such a short attention span,
Yeah.
it becomes increasingly more difficult to slow down and be still. And that's really required in order for us to examine our thoughts, even in real time. In a nutshell, that's what CBT is, and we can definitely talk more about what that looks like.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading a study on how an average person has over 60,000 thoughts a day. And so when somebody comes to me saying, "Oh, I don't really have any thoughts," I'm like, "Really?
Mhm.
Because we have over 60,000 of them." So it's more of, are we really thinking, or are we looking at what our thoughts are?
Mhm.
And that is a behavioral type of habit that we need to start working on. And habits, they don't just imprint in our brain one day to the other. It takes several weeks and maybe even months of consistency to make sure that we work on our thoughts. Our audience focuses on women who are people pleasers. And how would CBT help people in relationships, especially the women who are people pleasers? And what are some of the most common cognitive distortions or thinking that might be unhelpful for them in these relationships as people pleasers?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's also one of my favorite things to talk about. Now, this would be true not just in relationships. I do love
Okay.
talking about relationships and communication, and CBT as a foothold and
Yeah.
how we can improve and get what we want out of relationships and give. But this would be true whether it's social anxiety, whether it's
Okay.
anxiety in general. It all boils down to our thoughts.
Okay.
And our thoughts are a reflection of our beliefs. And our
Yeah.
beliefs about ourselves are a reflection of our core beliefs. As maybe you've had some other guests on who have talked about core beliefs.
Oh, yeah.
And I know it's such a common phrase now, automatic thoughts, whether we call them cognitive distortions or automatic
Yeah.
negative thoughts, or we call them harmful thinking habits, whatever the
Yeah.
lingo we
Yeah.
choose to use. I know it's really becoming common catchphrases now, but the truth is, it has everything to do with our behavior. And our behavior has everything to do with the quality of our lives,
Okay.
right? Um, so the way CBT helps someone who has anxiety in a relationship is that it helps us break patterns. If you've done, I don't know if you've done couples therapy, but in
Okay.
couples therapy, the goal is what we call pattern disruption.
Ooh.
When you're meeting with a couple, whether it's from premarital counseling or marital counseling or just couples, or they're on the brink of divorce, there's been trust issues, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
when you ask each person, what is your complaint? What is your view of the problem in the relationship? Both parties can usually agree it's a pattern of the same issues over and over again,
Okay.
or the same arguments, right? And oftentimes the arguing becomes about the arguing. It's not about the
Mm.
problem or the original offense. If you ever had
Yeah.
that happen, or you're maybe driving in a car on the way back from a holiday or something, and then or a party, and then one little thing gets one person going and they start bringing up the past and the other person gets defensive and then you're like 10 miles in the wrong direction from where you started
Yes. I always
and
say
nothing.
it's never about the cheese because they're like, oh, the cheese. It's never about the cheese. There's something else. I totally understand.
And part of addressing relationship problems is first understanding the self,
Okay.
right? So it is a very kind of multifaceted topic because we're talking about how do we track our own thoughts
Okay.
and
Yeah.
our own feelings to really, one, validate and understand where they're coming from.
Okay.
And then how do we communicate that to our significant other or our partner in a way that they can understand and stay curious instead of critical, right? Because
Yes.
what's that phrase? We want to seek understanding, not blame. Now,
Yes.
one person can do that, but getting somebody else to do that, our counterpart, is very tricky. And this is
Okay.
why relationship anxiety is such a problem because the
Yes.
anxiety in a relationship is usually a symptom of a bigger problem
Okay.
because you don't trust your partner to be transparent, right? And
Mm.
people who have anxiety in relationships usually have a lot of red flags. And what that usually looks like is passive communication. They're very passive, and when they try to be assertive, they overcorrect and they become aggressive or passive aggressive. And
Mm.
that just continues to further that pattern we're trying to break. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow. And so, what can you tell to help that pattern disruption whenever that behavior is happening, that repetitive behavior is happening?
Yeah, so if we use an example like automatic thoughts would be something like overgeneralizing,
Okay.
right? Or like you always blank, blank, blank,
Oh,
blank,
yes, I
right?
know. Oh my gosh, I know. That's something
You
that me and my
always do
husband,
this.
you always do. You never do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? Never? Not even once? Yeah.
And the thing is, our thoughts oftentimes come out. Sometimes hear people say, I don't know where that came from, or I didn't mean it that way, or
You took
there's
it
no
the wrong
filter.
way.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
And even that gets, not to get too off on a side quest here, but even rabbit trails like that, where you can say, oh, that was not what I meant, but then I, you get into the shoulding, right? I
Oh,
shouldn't have
yes.
to, I shouldn't have to filter my thoughts with my partner, right?
Yes.
Relationships should be easy,
Oh, which is
right?
another cognitive distortion, which is the
Exactly.
shoulds and woulds. And so
Hmm.
a lot of people assume that we have these automatic thoughts. Just one goes into it. And sometimes they compile each other until it's
Hmm.
just like, oh my gosh, where did we end up going? You get confused.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so first, I think going back to understanding the self, talking
Okay.
about what is a point of intervention, right? We're always
Okay.
looking for points of intervention with behavior change, with human behavior.
Okay.
So it starts with the self, right? Just like when we're working with clients, when we're working on relationship stuff on one side of the street, right? We can't, unless we're doing couples therapy, we're not privileged to working on the other half.
Yeah.
But what I try and remind clients is that you can't control or change other people. We can only affect change by proxy.
Mhm.
And I usually use chess as an example, just I love chess.
Okay.
Not that everybody plays chess, but maybe they'll get the concept. When you're playing chess with someone for a long time, like the same person, you'll find the two people tend to just make their moves. They're just chewing the fat. They're chit-chatting. They don't really think about what they're doing
Okay.
until it gets critical, right?
Oh, yeah.
But let's say you're playing with your same person you've played with for 10 years, chess, but then the other person uses a different opening move than they typically would.
Mhm.
What is that going to do to the person who's playing with them?
It's gonna make them think
It's
they
gonna,
did.
right.
Yeah.
It's gonna snap them out of that automatic response, right? That's going to cause them to
Wow.
pause and really contemplate, hey,
Yes.
what's going on here? Read the room. That's what happens
Yes.
in relationships. So, though we can't change other people, we
Mm-hmm.
can cause them, we can do what called a pattern interrupt. And we
Okay.
do that by changing the way we respond. And this is, of course, predicated on the assumption that there's a problem in the first, that we're doing something that we can change in the first place, right? I don't want to have this conversation assuming that the other person's not largely at fault, which is
Okay.
oftentimes the case. And that's a different, maybe a different conversation, but that's more about boundaries and
Yeah.
keeping a high price tag of oneself and knowing your
Okay.
negotiables and non-negotiables in a relationship.
Okay.
But when we're looking at the self, what we do have control over is how we're interpreting a situation, right? So in
Okay.
cognitive behavioral therapy, we really want to nail home what a thought is, right? A thought
Okay.
is either a statement,
Okay.
a question, or an image, right?
Hmm.
A statement, a question, or an image.
Wow.
Now, statements tend to be very matter of fact.
Okay.
I'm so stupid. I'm unlovable.
Hmm.
I can't believe I said that. My husband's an idiot. No, I'm just kidding.
He
um,
didn't throw the trash out. Oh, yes, he's an
no,
idiot.
I'm just kidding. So, statements are dangerous because we, unless again we're taught to think about our thinking, every thought we have, we give a green light.
Okay. Okay.
In cognitive behavioral therapy, we try and move clients to think about reframing their thoughts as questions. Remember when I said
Okay.
stay curious, not critical?
Okay.
Curiosity is the key.
Okay.
So if we can reframe our thoughts as questions, especially disturbing ones or intrusive thoughts, right? Because
Okay.
again, like you said, we have a like countless amount of thoughts every day, right?
Oh,
It's
so many.
60,000 or something. That's probably right.
Yeah, it's over.
So
Yes.
we obviously can't check every thought,
Mm-mm.
but the way we know a thought is worthy of checking is if we have an emotional charge to it,
Ah,
right? If a thought
yes.
brings up an emotional charge, that's our flag that says maybe we should do a check and balance on this. And this
Nice.
goes back to mindfulness, which is a huge pillar of CBT, right?
Okay.
And we can, I don't know if we'll get to that today, but understanding first our thoughts are either a statement or a question. We want to
Okay.
be able to rephrase it as a question or a more accurate, balanced, and complete thought. Take somebody who's facing divorce, right? They might say, my marriage was a failure. I'm not cut out for marriage.
Okay.
Or I failed my marriage, right? That would be like a very absolute thought, right?
Okay.
A
Okay.
more accurate, balanced, and complete thought would sound more like, ooh, my marriage didn't last as long as I'd hoped it to, it didn't end well,
Okay.
but I learned a lot about what I need in relationships and what I need to work on and what I bring to the table in the next one.
I
Right?
love
That's
how
a
you
more
said
accurate,
that.
balanced, and complete thought. You've moved away from I suck at relationships to hey, I learned a lot from this last relationship about how I can do the next one better.
Wow.
Right?
And people pleasers tend to do that. They tend
Hmm.
to just take in the burden of the responsibility in a relationship for themselves, but also of the other person. And I have to remind them, yes, you're responsible for 100% of your own behavior, but at best, 50% within the relationship. You can't do yours and their part.
Hmm.
And therefore, they end up having these negative thoughts, unhelpful thoughts, such as, I'm not good enough, I am unlovable, I am a failure, because of the relationship becoming unhealthy or just the disillusion of that relationship. What are some of the pattern disruptions that they could do to make it into a helpful thought?
Absolutely. So going back to Aaron Beck, the father of CBT, he
Yeah.
used to yell, "Stop!" every time like an automatic like negative thought would come up. He would
Okay.
yell at the clients. I don't suggest that,
Yeah.
and I don't want you to yell at yourself. Maybe an air horn. I'm just kidding. But the way we can get a foothold on it is learning to label our thoughts. And this is,
Oh,
again, a foundation of CBT because we all, sorry, spoiler alert, we all have automatic negative thoughts. We all
yeah.
struggle with at least one or more of the categories, whether that's negative filtering, whether that's mind reading, whether that's
Yeah.
catastrophizing, whether that's future fortune telling, comparative thinking. And again, the names are not all inclusive. You can name them whatever you want. I tell clients, you can come up with your own names. Call it Pinocchio.
Yeah.
I don't care. Whatever
Yes.
makes sense to you. But what we're
Yes.
we first have to learn how to label our thoughts in order to catch them.
Yeah.
In CBT, there's a little acronym. It's called CCC, catch it, check it, change it. So
Wow.
we have to first, and there's other, I guess,
Yeah.
other ones, but my favorite is catch it, check it, change
I
it.
like it.
And basically, what that means is first we have to learn how to catch our thought. We can't
Hmm.
catch our disruptive, dysregulating thoughts
Hmm.
unless first we know what to call them, right?
Okay.
So if we
Okay.
know that, hey, you know what? I notice when I get upset, I'm usually in the headspace of comparative thinking. I'm comparing myself to maybe I'm disabled and my partner's doing X, Y, and Z, and I feel like I'm just not contributing like I want to, and now I'm getting down on myself, right?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
would be like maybe a husband who's out of work
Okay.
or gets disabled on the job, and now he's trying to put things together at home, and his wife's working. He's feeling, again, if we go back to
Yeah.
traditional roles and mindsets, which in a lot of cultures, right?
Definitely.
You'll see oftentimes a lot of self-destructive behavior, leads to
Hmm.
alcoholism and other things because the person's stuck in that comparative thinking, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So what we want to do is learn to call it what it is. Oh, that was comparative thinking again. So
Okay.
we have a way to catch it. If we don't label it, there's no way to really know what we're looking for,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
There's a phrase I love. It's called what's measured gets improved, right? What we
Okay.
measure gets improved. Makes
Wow.
sense, right?
Yeah.
So first we have to be able to catch the thoughts that are causing us the distress and then be able to put them under the microscope and be like, what's this thought about? And
Okay.
this is where it gets tricky,
Okay.
Anita, is because what most people will do when they have intrusive thoughts, they might get good at catching them, but you know what they do? Most
Mm.
people, they try and push them away.
Oh,
Oh, don't
yes.
think about that. Oh,
Avoid
don't think
them.
about that. Don't think about that. That's not, no, I don't want to think about that right now. Or that's not true. Or they'll
Yes.
challenge it, right?
Okay.
So in CBT, it's taught that we should not chase or push our thoughts away.
Okay.
Don't
Okay.
chase them, don't push them away. And this goes back to that concept of mindfulness.
Okay.
When somebody's upset and they're venting, do they want advice typically, or do they want validation? They want to
Yes.
be heard, understood.
Yes. Mm.
And just like I said, in most arguments, if we can seek understanding instead of blame, is usually
Yes.
how we break patterns. It's true with the self. We can do this with others, but we rarely do this with ourselves.
Okay.
Rather than trying to push a thought away or chase a thought down, that's just like stewing, that we
Mm-hmm.
know is like twisting the knife. You could be doing the dishes or something, but you're not even in the room. You're like
Dissociated.
10 miles, yeah, like
Yeah.
stewing all the things you're either worried about or you're upset about or what your partner said to you 3 days ago.
Oh,
You're still not talking about, you know what I mean? That you feel is
yeah.
unresolved, open loops, right?
Wow.
So when it comes to intrusive thoughts, what we want to do is we want to be able to acknowledge them
Okay.
without giving them assent. Assent is saying that something is okay
Okay.
ethically, right? It means that
Okay.
we're okay with it. That's assent.
Okay.
That means we give it a green light. That's different than radical acceptance,
Okay.
which is more DBT-ish, but it's CBT based. Like radical acceptance is, oof, yeah, that really sucked. I really wish I
Oh,
hadn't said that. What my partner said to me really hurt my feelings.
okay.
But you know what? I'm going to choose not to think about that right now because right
Okay.
now I'm focused on X, Y, and Z.
Okay. I like
So that's
that.
mindfulness. That's being able to catch your thoughts, understand where they're coming from,
Okay.
understand where the wound is, or boundary violation, or remorse,
Mm-hmm.
or worry, right?
Okay.
So we get a little
Okay.
better at identifying what the thought is about. That's how we validate it.
Okay. Okay.
Why this thought's distressing us for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with anxiety, anxiety tends to be fear-based, just
Yes.
like anger is fear-based. When people get angry, they're usually anxious people.
Yes, yes. Yeah, anger is a secondary emotion. It
Yes.
is hiding behind the vulnerable, either sad or scared, but or both.
Hmm.
And because somebody who has fear can be like, "Oh, I'm so scared." No, the protect primitive response comes
Hmm.
in of the fight flight, and that's where anger comes in. So I always tell my patients, "Hey, when you're angry, I want you to explore that anger and go, since it's secondary, what other emotion is coupled with this anger? And let's
Hmm.
explore that emotion. And unless you really are in danger, then use the anger. But if you're not, let's explore the vulnerable emotion as well. So
Absolutely,
I like
100%.
And I like what you said about the whole intrusive thoughts, but I want to also tackle the other one, rumination.
Hmm.
So, how does rumination play into relationship anxiety? And how can you guide the people that, especially women who are people pleasers, because they do tend to ruminate as well,
Hmm.
to break that unhealthy pattern of overthinking?
My favorite tool, if we want to jump straight into it, is a worry journal,
A
right?
worry journal.
A
Okay.
worry journal. This is, and oftentimes I'll use for clients who have a lot of trouble with insomnia because of the ruminating.
Okay. Okay.
So a lot of people with high anxiety tend to stew a lot at night about the things they're worried about, ruminating about open loops,
Okay.
creating loops for future potential issues, right? And the brain loves to work on things. The brain doesn't really care, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
I haven't found that the brain really cares what we're working on.
Okay.
The brain likes something to chew on. But the
Okay.
problem is if we're not giving ourselves time for our mind to breathe, and we're not, two things, not giving it time to breathe during the
Okay.
day to really reflect on the things that are bothering us, and two, giving it something constructive to work on that's healthy,
Okay.
a healthy outlet,
Okay.
then, or creative outlet, whatever you want to call it, then oftentimes when our head hits the pillow at night, it'll use that as an opportunity to solve all the world's problems.
Yeah.
A worry journal, what that does, and I always tell clients, it doesn't have to be pen to paper. I'm not a pen to paper guy. Like
Everybody's
journaling is not
different.
my cup
I
of tea.
agree.
I know it sounds
Yeah.
weird coming from a therapist. Like I just, it's a chore for me. So that's why I like bullet journaling, or in this case, like a
Yes.
worry journal could be the note app on your phone, could be
Okay.
your calendar, could be a voice memo you leave for yourself. But however you do it, I personally like using Asana because I have an aversion to paper.
Oh,
Asana's a great
yes. I
program.
have a
Yeah.
sauna. Yes,
You
that's
create a
so
worry.
good.
I can always do a demonstration on what that would look like with the worry journal. But the idea is that if you have an intrusive thought,
Hmm.
whether it's at 2 p.m. while you're doing the dishes, work on the worry journal, or whether than using that time to try and solve the problem, you're going to just write it down verbatim in your worry journal. Verbatim. What is your distressive thought? And then you put the journal away. Now, the magic is having a time you set aside to review the journal, not in the moment, right? You're just putting it down because usually the brain will spin on rumination when it, because it worries that you're going to forget.
Okay.
The brain, like you said, the fight or flight, it doesn't like to feel threatened. And
Okay.
when we have identified something as a threat or a problem, the brain won't let it go until we've heard of cognitive closure, right?
It's,
Cognitive closure is important because no thought is good or bad, right?
hmm.
It's really all, if we're going to get philosophical about it, right? What is good? What is bad? What is
Yeah.
anything, right? What is
Yeah.
life's purpose? Ooh, let's not get too deep on that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
But
know. It's all based on interpretation. I know. And one of the things that my patients, when I tell them, like, did you know there's no right, wrong, good, or bad? And don't tell me that. And there isn't, because it really is based upon what you deem it wrong, good, or bad. But
Mhm.
in reality, there really isn't anything. In fact, yes, let's not get
It's
philosophical,
all
but
in, and that's a very deep rabbit hole we can go down talking about how our values are intrinsically tied to our thought process, which sounds
yes,
rational, but we don't really need to think about it that way, right?
yes.
But a worry journal is helpful because it helps us write down our concern verbatim. Then we can come back to it during, I don't like to even call it a worry time. I think of it as a reflection time or
Okay.
problem solving time.
Okay.
And so then we come back to that, what we've written down, and we pick one thing. Maybe you had 10 worries during the day. We're just going to focus on one. And then you're going to write down brainstorm some ideas under it in
Okay.
terms of how you can address it. And the real important thing with this is to make sure that we're not judging our solutions. There's no good or bad idea. We're just brain dumping. Again, we're giving our brain just room to breathe.
Okay.
If I did this, I could do that. We could do this, we could do that. And then if you have time left over, you pick one
Okay.
solution to try out.
Okay.
Now, if you can't come up with any solutions, it's either not really a problem or it's not a right now problem.
Got it.
We can put a pin in it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you could put a pin and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to work on you this date. And just even defining it, I'm going to work on you on this date or later on this, the brain will be like, oh, okay, we're going to work on it eventually.
Right.
And it won't feel like you're not catering to it.
Right. And it could be anything from a minor argument with your partner
Yeah.
to end of life planning, your funeral. The brain just wants something to work on. When we have a lot of intrusive thoughts during the day or distressing thoughts or seemingly important thoughts, we
Yeah.
just want to put it that way,
Okay.
we're not great at prioritizing,
Yeah.
right? Usually we will take the first thing and run with it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with not checking our thoughts or not triaging our thoughts, if you want to think of it that way. Like in an ER, people come in, like one person has an axe in their chest and another person has an infected toenail.
Okay.
If the toenail comes in first and the axe comes in behind them, if you're not triaging, the person with the axe is probably not going to get the right attention.
Oh,
But with our thoughts, we need to be careful that we're considering
mm-hmm.
how we're investing our emotional time and energy into each expedition.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense? Because we can't
Yes.
get to everything that's
Yeah.
bothering us,
Yeah.
and not everything is has the same value or is as worthy of our attention.
I love that. Yes, value. And I think
Right.
this is where people need to keep in mind what are your values? And I even tell them put it on a note card, laminate it, put tape on it. So whenever you're having these thoughts and go, how can I triage as you say it? When you bust out those values, you can then put importance with those thoughts to this value. Which one is really aligned with this value? And let me focus on that, going back to the self.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And
100%.
the other thing I notice with relationships with people pleasers, they tend to be in codependent relationships
Hmm.
where the other partner wants them to be taken care of. So, how can we help people pleasers who are in codependent relationships break free with that cycle? And how can CBT work within those issues?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we can talk about the origins of anxious attachment styles, which is usually
Mm-hmm.
with people pleasers.
Okay.
Usually, maybe your audience already knows this, but our social map, our love map is usually developed by age 5 or 6. A love
Wow.
map is how we learn to give and receive affection.
Okay. Okay.
It's our roadmap, our blueprint,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call it. There's probably other
Yeah.
terms for it, but it's like a love
Yeah.
blueprint, love map. It's our order of operations for how
Okay.
we get our needs met, how we feel wanted, how we show
Mm-hmm.
affection, right? How we
Yeah.
feel validated.
The love and
How,
belonging.
yeah,
Yes.
sense of belonging. And somebody who grows up with very inconsistent parenting or emotionally unavailable parents, or
Mm.
even if you're raised by secondary caregivers but you were never really consulted by your parents about how you feel about those secondary caregivers. Like you're not given any autonomy.
Okay. Yeah.
So it can even be those nuanced things. Somebody has a babysitter or a family relative who watches you X number of hours while your parents work, how old you are. If your parents don't consult you about how you feel about that, that can have a detrimental effect as well.
Wow.
But ultimately, it's the inconsistent messages we get from our primary caregivers growing up that can
Mm-hmm.
sometimes lead to what's known or referred to as an anxious attachment
Okay.
style, right?
Okay.
Um, as we get older, we tend to go out of our way to seek external validation. And what
Okay.
that looks like is we will compromise our own needs. We will compromise even our own values in order
Mm.
to avoid any sense of abandonment from our partner. Abandonment could doesn't necessarily mean they're walking out the door. It can be
Yeah.
emotional withholding.
Yeah.
And so that's oftentimes where, yeah, you'll find people who have a lot of anxiety in relationships. They have a very low distress tolerance, which means like
Wow.
if I say, it could be something as simple as if I say hello and try and kiss, if you try kiss my wife or something when I get home, if I don't get a kiss right back, theoretically, then if I was somebody with an anxious attachment style, I might take that as, oh, are they drifting from me? Do they not? Did I do
Mm-hmm.
something wrong? And your mind starts spinning and like, oh, and you start being apologetic before even if you don't say anything, you're already in that headspace
Yeah.
when nothing's even wrong. The problem with that too is that the person with an anxious attachment style will oftentimes not express their needs
Okay.
because they're afraid that what if I do express my needs and then my partner does not reciprocate? What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Oh, that's a good question for my audience here. Let them know the answer.
So the antidote for that, if you find yourself in a codependent relationship as a people pleaser or
Hmm.
someone who's got an anxious attachment style, whatever you want to call it, who's anxiously attached, is we just work on validating the self. And in psychology, there's a
Mm.
term called reflected appraisals.
Okay.
And reflected appraisals means that our sense of self, our value, what we think of ourselves, our self-esteem, our ego, whatever you want to call it, is determined by what other people think of us. But not just anybody, but the people that we make our mirror, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
always tell clients, be careful who you make your mirror.
Wow,
Because
definitely.
inevitably we're going to that's going to have an impact on our self-esteem based on what those people think. Now, a securely attached person
Mm-hmm.
comes into a relationship already having a strong sense of self, right? They know what their values are, they know what their negotiables are, they know what their non-negotiables are, they know what they bring to the table, and they know what they need to work on. And rather than looking for somebody else to quote complete them,
Mm-hmm.
they are looking to enhance each other in the relationship. Make
Yes.
sense?
Yes, definitely. I'm with
Yeah.
you, not because I need you, because
Right.
I want to be with you and you
Correct.
complement each other. Wow.
It's a
I
choice.
love
It's an
that.
active choice, and it's not, I don't like the word desperation, but it's not, it's more because you build each other up, you're good for each other,
Yeah.
and it's like when you're looking for a job, if you're not desperate for the job, you do much better on the interview. Why is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
You're not desperate. And I don't mean that, I do not mean that in a
Yes.
negative
Yes.
way. I just mean people who are have anxious attachment styles sometimes will forego what they know is best for them because they're afraid of missing out. They get FOMO in their own relationship.
Yes. And the other thing also is you were mentioning the caretakers. If the caretakers are cold or even they're
Mhm.
overly protective or they have relationship enmeshment, oh, if you feel like this, I feel like this. What ends up happening going through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first step is the basic needs and then safety, and then it's love and belonging. So when those needs are not met, as you mentioned with the imprinting before 5 years old, then what happens, that need for safety kicks in because it's unresolved, but yet they now want the love and belonging. So we have
Mhm.
that inner conflict of necessity. I need to be safe because technically, emotionally, you don't feel that way. And so
Mhm.
you go into that relationship just to feel safe. And then you go on also wanting to feel love and belonging, and you jump back and forth. And those look like you have the desire and then you have the longing, you have the wanting to the judgment, or you have the submissive. And so
Mhm.
those type of conflicts end up being because those needs weren't met of safety growing up, but then you also want again the love and belonging. And so to them emotionally it's a sign of necessity. I need this to survive, which is where the desperation comes in. I have to live. And this is an emotional, not a physical, yes, you're alive, but this is an emotional need of I'm gonna die feeling,
Mhm.
which is where the abandonment comes in. Because if we think about it, you can't be abandoned, because abandoned is when you're a child, and when you abandon someone, they're gonna die. That means they cannot survive. But to them, it feels just like that. I'm being abandoned, meaning I'm gonna die if I'm not with ABC type of feeling.
Mhm.
I don't, yeah.
Worst case scenario, right?
Worst case scenario, yeah. And so moving forward, how can you help women balance being assertive, but they also have the anxiety with conflicts? How can CBT help with
Mhm.
that?
Oh, it helps tremendously because you start seeing the problem as the problem and not the person as the problem.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about that, like conflict resolution skills. But ultimately, with CBT, we're trying to back it all the way in to
Okay.
assumptions.
Okay.
Because once you can identify your intrusive thoughts and reframe
Mm-hmm.
them, the next step is to challenge your assumptions.
Okay. Okay.
Why we believe something is true. And it's not comfortable, right?
Mm-mm.
This is why a lot of people avoid therapy. It's because they don't want to think about, they don't want to be challenged on their assumptions, right?
Yeah.
And that would be,
Yeah.
to your example, if somebody feels like if their partner leaves them, or they were to leave their partner, for example, then
Mm-hmm.
the sky would fall and all the bad things would happen. They wouldn't be able to live without them, right?
Yeah.
That's an assumption. Where does that come from? What basis does that assumption have?
Okay.
And is that true, right? Because when we go about our business in the world, we are all operating off of rules and assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
and they're intrinsically twined, right? If I grow up believing the world is a dangerous, scary place because that's what my parents taught me or that's what I saw,
Yeah.
and that I
Yeah.
shouldn't trust anyone, then I'm going to assume my rule is that my assumption is that everyone has an angle, everybody wants something from me, and they're not to be trusted.
Okay.
So my rule to back up my assumption would be I don't give other people any extension of trust. Or to put it more simply, if I go to the market, I don't smile.
Okay.
I don't greet the cashier, I don't greet the person. And that could be extended to anything because I assume that everybody is out with an angle, nobody's worthy of engendering myself
Yeah. Yeah.
because that makes me vulnerable.
Okay.
So if I grew up thinking the world is yeah, bad things happen, but the world is mostly a good place. It's beautiful. Most people are well intended. I'm going to have a very different engagement within the world and how I
Okay.
relate to others. I'm going to extend myself. I'm going to assume people, have the best intentions. If somebody makes a mistake, I'm going to give them grace
Okay.
as
Yeah.
opposed to berate them and shut them down and cut them out of my life
Yes.
because I
Definitely.
have trust issues. And that's a whole other topic. If you want to get into trust and what
Oh my
trust
gosh.
is and what a lie is, that's
Oh,
a
I
whole other
know.
thing. But it's all value based, and values are based on rules and assumptions. And those are based on core beliefs about the self and how the world works.
Oh.
So if we want to change how we respond in relationships, we have to get very good
Mm-hmm.
at thinking about our thinking,
Mm-hmm.
reframing our thoughts as questions, because
Okay.
questions beget better questions,
Okay.
which beget better solutions,
Yes.
and learning to be inquisitive instead of accusatory
Mm.
to our partners.
Mm.
And that's that thing when we talk about mindfulness, it's being able to hold my emotion here while I engage with you here. It's not that I'm rejecting my emotions because that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm validating my emotion, but I'm holding it while I focus on seeking understanding instead of
Okay.
blame,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
second we start taking things personally, then our acute stress response kicks in, our self-defense mechanisms, our walls go up,
Yeah.
our protest behavior. And there's a saying in relationship counseling that when people get upset, they either get big or they get small.
Oh,
And
yes.
that goes back to that fight or flight. The people who flight, they get quiet, they withdraw, they avoid
Mm-hmm.
conflict. People who get bigger get argumentative. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
same thing, and that has everything to do with what you learned and how to cope with conflict growing up. If you grew
Wow.
up in a home where there's domestic violence and there was a lot of arguing, and you just learned that maybe you tried to intervene once and you got beat too, or you're traumatized about what you saw in the future, maybe you learn to hide under your bed. It's just an
Yeah.
example. You grow up
Yeah.
learning, hey, when there's conflict, where do I hide? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless we learn to reparent ourselves and learn that not every situation is equitable to one experience. And that goes back to that overgeneralization and that
Yeah.
as a coping skill and a thought process because not every situation demands the same response.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's other ways to do things. Yes, if there's an active shooter, run by all means and hide.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
it's an argument with your spouse, there's no immediate threat. It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
But our nervous system doesn't always know the difference,
Yeah.
depending on
Yeah.
how we coped growing up. And so when it comes to managing conflict, really, it's learning. There's a term in dialectic behavioral therapy called Dear Man. If you want to
Okay.
look it up, guys, it's an acronym. Check it out. It's really helpful. It's called Dear Man.
Wow.
And it's really about how to engage an offense, how to engage conflict resolution without blowing up the situation and build up your self esteem. So that's basically you state how you feel,
Mm-hmm.
you seek understanding about you validate the other person's position, You state your needs, what
Mm-hmm.
you need, the behavior change you're asking for, and what you can give in return. But you're not
Wow.
really making an apology. You're definitely not making an apology for something you didn't do.
Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
and that can sound different in terms of how you're validating somebody
Yeah.
else. And timeliness is important, right?
Okay.
And getting buy-in from the other person. We want to try not to, and picking one thing at a time. We
Oh,
don't want to blast the
yes.
other person with a laundry list of complaints, because which
Yeah.
is what usually happens when we start arguing, right?
Yeah.
One, one, one agenda item, right?
Yes, definitely. I love that. I One of the techniques I give my patients is whatever the issue is, of course, you have to have a meeting of the minds. Step number one, you have to be cool, calm, and collected, or else there's no way you're
Mm,
going to make connections. And so they have green, yellow, and red flags, and they're
yeah.
little cards. And in that cards, they have the do's and do nots, like no blaming, no criticizing, no putting down. And then they use that to calm their emotions. Okay, you know what? I'm already getting a little bit heated here. So
Mm,
they'll put a yellow card knowing, okay, we're not there yet, because once they put the red card, they're going to have to take a time out or time in
mhm,
away from the issue.
mhm,
But what card is always there is that one problem. And they know that if there's something else that comes up, say, okay, we can discuss that at a later time, but this is what we're doing. And they have to have a visual because, yeah, you get caught into that storm of different things. And then they've told me, man, these little green, yellow, red has helped me learn about my other partner's emotions where I didn't even know they were getting yellow. And I thought they were just fine. And just
mhm.
them going like that, not even needing to talk to help them just navigate those emotions and thoughts and being able to solve that one problem. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I
And
love that. I love that. You can
yeah.
even use like index cards, right?
Yes, definite construction paper or
Yeah.
tag boards. You mentioned the unhealthy thinking, the automatic thoughts, the rumination, intrusive thoughts, the strategies on how to work with conflicts. When couples come in, how do you help them become aware of these values when they've never even heard of it? I know some of my patients are like, what the heck? The ones that are new or
Mm.
listening in. How do you incorporate values in the relationship and align that with the behaviors that they're doing?
Great question. The way I do it with clients, rather than talking about values, because a lot of people have trouble sometimes
Yeah.
listing their values, or they might give you superficial values like
Yes.
trust, honesty. I mean, those are all good, right? But those are like level one values.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
I always ask, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's gonna go from the head to the heart pretty quick.
Yeah.
When you talk about like when something happens and I say, what did that mean to you? They said, that meant that they think that what I do isn't enough. What does that mean to you? What does not enough mean to you? Where does that come from? And as they start to dig, it's like the seven layers deep, the why question. You ever heard that?
No, tell me.
Oh, it's great. It's a great
Ah,
way to get down to your values as far as like helping somebody else get down to theirs. But it's
okay.
called the seven layers deep. I have to give Dean Graciosi credit for that one.
Okay.
But the the seven layers deep is asking yourself why. If you
Okay.
can get someone to respond seven times to that question, kind of what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? Same idea,
Yeah.
but that's you get pretty quick to the core beliefs or fears that drive our behavior. And once they unlock that, then everything else seems clearer
Mm.
because then they can explore their values. They can also speak to their values and they know what they need. Because most
Hmm.
people don't know what they want or need.
Yeah.
They know what upsets them, but they have a hard time identifying what it is they really want and need, how to ask that of themselves, and more importantly,
Hmm.
how to ask that of others,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Whose
Yes.
support they need.
Ye-
And that's the tricky part. But yes, it starts with the surface level thoughts, the automatic thoughts, learning to catch those, reframe them, because that's the only way we can self-regulate. We
Okay.
can't do the other stuff until we're regulated. We can't do the conflict
Yeah.
resolution, like you said, unless we're calm and collect. And if there's too much noise going on with a committee in our head, that self-dialogue, or
Hmm.
for example, how if you before you come home, like you're already thinking about something you're upset about, or that your partner spoke to you about, and you're already playing out when I get home, they're gonna say this, I'm gonna say that, and you're already playing out a whole tape in your
Mm.
head about how the
Yeah.
argument's gonna play out. It's stopping that tape. Throw the tape away.
Okay.
Burn the tape.
Yeah.
Because what that does, that's already preparing our nervous system for a fight. And so the way we get past
Wow.
all that is the quicker we can get to our needs and
Yeah.
our values and
Yeah.
work from a place of value and understanding, and seeking understanding of the other person's values and needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is
Oh,
the only way we get anywhere in conflict resolution. And really, what's the point? What is
mm,
the point in resolving conflict? So that we can have healthy, meaningful relationships, right?
I love that.
That's the, why,
Yes.
otherwise, what's the point in being in a relationship?
Yes,
What are we doing?
yeah. And which brings me
Yeah.
to my next question. What advice would you give people who are starting in a relationship on, especially if they know that the other person's a people pleaser, to really support and empower them?
So if you're in a relationship with a people pleaser, the most important thing is to be an approachable person.
Okay.
To be an approachable person and give the other person a lot of reminders that it's safe to share anything and there's no judgment. Now that's a tall order,
It
but that is
is.
what
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you don't talk about hard things. It doesn't mean that
Okay.
you don't express your opinion about things, but people pleasers are very sensitive to disappointment. They have to understand that if they are going to share something that's on their mind, they can,
Hmm.
I think of it as thinking out loud.
Okay.
Because for a people pleasing person, they're afraid if they think out loud that the other person is going to take that as gospel, and that could
Okay.
have a negative impact on the relationship.
Okay.
A people pleasing person needs permission to think out loud
Hmm.
without judgment,
Mm. Yeah, so
if that
maybe
makes
just,
sense.
yeah, yeah. So maybe sending that precedent because I know sometimes a partner is right away wanting to solve the problem.
Hmm.
And one of the things I always tell people, they don't know what you need if you don't communicate to them. So if you just want them to listen, no judgment, we listen, we don't judge, or we listen and we just be curious, you got to let them know, hey, I don't need you to solve my problem. I've got this, but I just need you to listen, don't judge. I need to hear and everybody has their own words of affirmation and
Hmm.
validation. Know to tell the partner, what are your words of validation that you like to hear? Because everybody is different. And it's okay to say those things because I don't know if it is in movies or intergenerational where they think they're my soulmate. They should already know me. Nope,
Hmm.
you never really know them. You've got to really allow them
Yeah,
that space for them to know you and you get to know them through communication. Yes,
absolutely.
love that.
Mic drop.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I know, right? I know our audience will love to connect with your work and get to know a little bit more of what you do. What is the best place for them to connect with you and let them know if you have any new projects, exciting news that you have coming up?
Yes, absolutely. That's the easy one. The mentalhealthtoolbox.com
I love that.
is where you'll find the links to all of my podcast, YouTube channel. I have a shop I'm working on there.
Okay.
If you're a therapist and you are interested in having handouts for therapy, work with your clients, educational material, you can jump on there. I have some free stuff for you. You can also grab some cheap stuff where there's an all access pass. It's $10 a month. You can have
Yeah.
unlimited access. I'm adding to it weekly. If you have any requests, let me know. I'll be happy to create handouts for you. I just like to have a one-stop place where I can grab things. And I create
Mhm.
them for myself and I put them up there. So as I'm using them, I figure other therapists could benefit too.
Oh, and you have some journals there too that I
Yeah,
really
I have a
liked for
gratitude
those.
journal, got some
Yes,
guided
yes,
meditations.
yes. Any
Um,
worry journals by any chance?
you know what? That'll be the next thing.
There
I'll
you
add a
go.
word journal.
There you go. I like
Thank you.
it.
I usually refer to the Tiny Buddha word journal, but maybe I'll create my own.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
And journals can either be upregulating or downregulating, and that's okay. It really is dependent
Mhm.
on the person, but I'd love to just have it just in case they need it. Anybody, it's good to just let it all out like a brain dump. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
love it.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
I normally ask two questions to my guests, and I know you have two daughters, correct?
I do.
Oh,
Yes.
I
I wouldn't know what to
know.
do with a boy. Yeah.
That's what my husband says. I'm a girl mom, three girls, I
Uh-huh.
swear. And he says, I wouldn't know what to do with a boy. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, well, he's always wanted girls. So I hear you. Assume that all your work that you've done that you just discussed right now was lost through whatever unforeseen circumstance. And nobody would have known about your work or what you do. And in 3 generations down the line, your daughter, granddaughter, and great granddaughter, they find one letter. And in this letter, what truths would you bestow to that lineage of women?
Oh, absolutely, to keep a high price tag on themselves, that they
Mm.
are enough just as they are, and to never compromise their values.
Ah, I love
Yeah.
that. Yes, it gives me chills.
And the world is a playground.
And oh, yes. Ah, God, it's like a theater. You do what you
We lose
want.
that somewhere. I don't know where we lose that, where when you're a kid, time moves
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah.
And when you're a
Yeah.
kid, like everything seems possible. Somehow, as we get older, I don't know if it's all the demands, time moves too fast. There's never enough time in a day to get all the things done. And somehow our playtime is diminished to next to nothing.
Yeah.
So I think I would tell my kids and future generations, don't lose that.
Play.
And
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm so passionate about helping clients focus on autonomy.
Yes. I
Autonomy
love that.
is, I think, one of the pillars of happiness.
Definitely. And our last question. What is your definition of an empowered woman?
Ooh, my definition of an empowered woman. Quiet strength,
Yes.
as
Yes.
anybody. I think altruistic, not knowing you're capable of anything, but not always needing to prove it
Hmm.
to other people. Being approachable and non-reactionary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
I don't know if that
Thank
makes sense, but I don't know.
Yes,
That's a good
it
question.
does.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I'd be
And
empowered anybody.
yeah, I know, right? Any person. I love that. And thank you,
Yeah.
Patrick, for joining us in this episode. And I know my audience will enjoy all this information as much as I have.
Ah, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much for having me on, Anita. Um, I hope this is
And
helpful to your audience.